Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another Mish-Mashing Battle Lounge with the 2MK team. We are, once again, Mish-Mashing. There's nothing more to say about it today. We're not going to make any jokes about what day it is, or anything. We're just here to fight today. Except technically not in the sense that Kazuki Dynasty is not likely to actually be fighting today. And certainly won't be playing Karine if she is, at least not at first. We're going to see a lot more of the in-betweens, and Amara is back at least for today's session. So you might get to see some Abigail action which you've been missing. But as she is getting back into it, has been out of it for a while, spending a lot of time on work on site, and can't afford to necessarily strain. You know how carpal tunnel gets. Not that she has it, but you know, you don't want it either. But you can definitely expect to see at least some of the usual devastating Abigail action you expect from her as we go on. And some specific practice that goes with that. She's probably going to be working today on a lot of little things, and sometimes just cutting loose and not bothering to specifically aim to work on any of those things. But if you have been watching her play before, end up being a fan, you expect to see mostly the same things. Her experience with the character she's facing off with in the lounge is decently high, for various reasons. So join us if you want to face off with Abigail, or to fight any of the people you normally see in this lounge. We are, as always, Atlantic Rim, basically. We've got 3 rounds, first to 2 with character select off today. So you can find us that way and join up for Street Fighter V action. As for whether or not there will be much talking on stream today, it mostly depends on the matchups we see. As usual, we are unlikely to be having heavy discussion on matchups we already know, that we see every week. I'm expecting the other team members to drift in later on though, so despite the fact that it is the size of lounge where you tend to see us fighting each other a lot, I'm not necessarily thinking that it's going to happen at first. Meaning, even more importantly, that if you want to get in on it, now is probably the time. Though you should note that if you expect that you're not going to be able to beat her, you might have a little trouble getting the match, because as noted, she can't necessarily spend as much time grinding through the lounge beating up everyone as she has done previously. Meaning you might get the occasional drop to back. We're not the greedy type, so please feel free that if you find that the person you want to fight isn't the one you're matched up against, you can drop the back yourself. We might take the hint, we might understand what needs to be done, we'll rearrange, maybe, depending on the timing. And if it's not too much of a waste of your time, you can just hang around anyway. Ooh, the air knee smash. Happy for him there. Obviously, DeWolf has been working on this Execution has been largely the bane of his play as Alex for a while now. There are definitely things that he knows how to do, timings he knows how to set up, but just doesn't get the actual input required to do the job. And as you know from watching the stream before, it's a fairly frustrating experience for him. So, seeing those come up is probably a good sign. Yep. Definitely happy to see those.
Abigail wins.
As for us, I'm not really sure that the change in character on the screen right now has made it clear that she will not be playing, but Kansugi Dynasty is not at the moment planning to play any Fang. This might actually happen at some point later, but for now, assume that the Fang, as long as you see Fang, it means that this is more so spectator mode, and Fang is not likely to be played. If that changes later on just for the sake of, oh, let's fill some time, or poke at a matchup, we'll see. But here we are at what we generally consider a stress point. Hellswart Bison is one that you probably need to fight the bot to get used to. And Abigail is not a character that deals with him super well because you have to parry him for a ton of different things he wants to do. The player also tends to stand at a different spot than normal Bison because they have that option to get in so easily using the V trigger. Sorry, using the V skill. So you can see here that this long range game, where this not really trying to get in or anything, ends up feeling very different as a total thing. You can't do that much. But Abigail does have that whiff punish. You can't really keep Abigail out, his range is too long. And even if you don't specifically get whiff punished by that, you'll get whiff punished by something else. So it's not really in Bison's best interest to use this game plan, except in combination with the same annoying Hellwart. The problem is that the reason the Hellwart works is that you normally want your opponent to be holding back and trying to block in that direction, whereas Abigail players tend to just walk forward and have no specific concern otherwise. This actually matches something we were discussing earlier today though, that it's likely that Seth players are also going to play a lot like this sometimes. It's in their best interest to force Abigail to come to them and attempt to either break armor or push through things. Abigail has multiple tools for this, including Giant Flip and his down back heavy kick style sweep, but neither of these things really helps until you've gotten the opponent near to the corner, so you end up with this very slow, sort of boring and to some people frustrating game plan or gameplay where you basically just spend your entire time walking your opponent to the corner and anti-airing them. Fortunately, Abigail does have enough damage to make this a big deal, but the question is whether or not you actually want to play it. Mostly, Amara doesn't really want to play this type of match too much, so congrats to the player for whatever is about to happen. But it's unlikely to be super effective because Abigail can just delete you health-wise if they really want to. But the mental state required for this sort of match is not one she's particularly good at. In fact, it's probably not even worth continuing this one. This person can just take this at the moment. One person who does deal with this way better, but might be having connection issues today, I'm hearing through the grapevine, is the President. And in this case, playing possibly on Seth, I'm not sure because they might not have been noting that the match was not going to continue. Might end up back with Alex again. Yes, it looks like that's what's going to happen. But similarly, DeWolf is better at dealing with this sort of playstyle because the way that DeWolf wants to go in doesn't really get countered that easily. The main thing he would need for this matchup is to use the trigger 2, because this style of play does not in any way... Alex does not benefit from using parry against a player whose wish is to do this. Not even when Bison actually starts to play pressure and starts to push in on Alex, because you can't absolutely be sure what Bison will do in the pressure strings. He has a lot of options that are still fairly heavily advantaged. So we're probably going to see the Rage Boost, the DDT style. Not because it hits Bison all that often, but because it makes neutral easier for Alex once the V-trigger is active. And activating the V-trigger at the beginning, or rather as early as possible, is easier because the opponent isn't really trying to control space. They aren't putting you under pressure to the point where you care. You get a lot of time to do this, and you won't take too much damage from doing it, even if they went for something on reaction. One thing that's very important to understand about this type of player or this type of play style is that the opponent must change it the moment you get a life lead. Understanding that is super important. Your focus should not be playing the full match. The focus should be get the life lead and force them to do something else. Literally anything else. Because if they are very skilled, they'll show you all of their cool stuff, and this was just kind of like testing whether or not you could actually break their defense. If they're not, they'll probably panic. And that's kind of important. Because the sort of person that panics in that situation where they realize, I can't necessarily beat you if you have the life lead, does exactly this. They go offense immediately. They're either trying to prove a point most of the time, or just recognizing that, no, this person understands what was happening here. I don't need to fight them like that. So here, that would be my expectation either way, regardless of whether or not this player is, by most people's standards, a jerk, as most Bison players are, or someone who's coming to try to help and teach people. The expectation I would have is that they would spend one round doing exactly that, and force now the defense, because it's like, okay, I know that if I let you get the life lead, I have to deal with this. It depends on what you want to work on, though. If you want to work on your offense, by all means keep on trying to go in, keep on seeing if you can get through their stuff. If you want to work on your defense, this is better because you force Bison to do Bison offense things. But at this moment they have the life lead, so they could go back to playing their defensive style. The tactics of it are fairly important to understand. The team generally has a little bit more problems with this than you'd think, because fighting games are very cerebral and not everyone specifically wants to play them that way. But understanding that specific aspect of it is still important. Because at some point you have to work on it. Even if you expect to go to tournaments, to have a certain type of hype, you can't just decide, I am not going to fight people who fight like this. And most of the time, it's not even that frustrating once you've gotten both aspects of it down. What's often missing is some skill that you don't normally get to build up because you don't fight people like this. Or because you don't have a Bison bot to teach you how to stop hell work. The point is, more so, there are always going to be a certain type of people in fighting games whose goal is to either frustrate you or push on your reactions or understanding of something. And if you don't have the way out of that, to at least a certain extent, that's on you. You cannot say this is unfair in any way. But tactically, you have an option here. Tactically, the wolf can deal with this by getting a life lead and sitting on it. And that was probably a missed execution there. But you get the understanding of what your opponent will do if you give them that scenario, that life lead that you're sitting on. But it doesn't look like he's going to be ready for this one for a while. It takes a while to get used to Hell Warp, and I'm fairly sure he either doesn't have a Bison bot at all, or just doesn't fight Bisons enough.
It's go time.
So I want to throw some stuff here, because it does fit in with the model of what I'm demonstrating, or talking about rather. Don't expect victory here, because I have not played Fang in a long time. But let's think about what the opponent's wish is. The opponent's wish at the moment, from our understanding so far, was to keep away and keep being frustrating.
Round one.
So we should be able to put out... Right, that should happen, because that's the first thing you should do against Fang if you have the option. And Fang has ways to deal with that, but not particularly good ones. I have to remember what it is now. I think it's jumping medium kick? I don't remember for sure. But there is no downside to just walking forward on Fang at the beginning of the round, other than you wouldn't get to do any of your Fang stuff. So let's do that. Oh, is that how that works? I've literally forgotten how to do this man's moves. Okay then. It's possible that they'll just leave if I don't really fight them. Some people of this type also tend to get bored in a way when this happens, because you kind of make the point that you're not really interested. But again, that's still on you as the player. As frustrating as this can be, it is on you to deal with it. Is it jump medium kick? I'm gonna try jump medium kick.
Fight.
There we go. No, not that one. Fang unfortunately lacks most of the scrambles that you'd want, the options for it for most characters. And because his stand medium kick doesn't actually anti-air that well, you have to be ready with the down... Is down heavy punch? That, yeah. Light kick works somewhat. Okay.
You lose.
But the aim there was more so to point out the concepts of the levels of particular predictability of a Bison player whose aim is to frustrate you. Bison is not a frustrating character for the most part. He's a dominating character. If you want to deal with him, and his aim is to frustrate you, he's generally weaker.
Let's do this.
Abigail is not good at getting the life lead on Bison. If you're lucky and you react properly to their first action, you might get something. But for the most part, not good at life lead. Even if he does manage to parry out of Bison pressure, it often doesn't lead to enough damage that any damage you took during the pressure mattered. Abigail is better at converting from this into big damage. And this is where the parry also helps out, because it helps you build up a little meter a little faster. If you do get it though, this is basically your situation. Amara fought the same way against Bison or Ryu. Once you have the life lead, you don't really have to do too much.
Looks like I've got more horsepower.
Round 2. Fight.
But this doesn't necessarily mean that your opponent is not going to be completely serious. They might just quote-unquote give up the first match after a bit. In this case, it's optimal for us because if Amaro wins this, this person doesn't get to play anymore. Not sure if flag or not, but it probably doesn't matter. So this is just us relaxing for a couple seconds, honestly. Oh wait, they were looking for meter to finish off something. That makes sense. Because you can hell warp into like super, which matters. Well, honestly, in this case, when I say things like you don't get to say we're not fighting you, this one is where I take that to a little bit, where I would go to the opposite of saying that. Because the player, as you can see now, doesn't intend to actually use any tactics or things that most people would consider to be skills. They're just testing reactions and hoping for the best, which isn't something you can learn from as a player. So I would honestly just kick them. I'm not sure if I can just kick them in match, but I would want to. Because it doesn't serve any purpose at this point. Unfortunately, I cannot do that, so let's go. Abigail does have a good option here if they really want it though. As in, he can just do the sweep, the down back sweep on a lot of things Bison wants to do here. Anyway, this is not relevant, so let's have this person leave, basically. Congratulations, Barahona RD, for your stellar performance and proof of your incredible skills at Street Fighter V. We clearly cannot handle your greatness and will have to give up. Huh. I cannot find a button that will get me out of this menu. That's interesting. Hopefully a match will start and it will drag me out of this menu. But looking like no. One of those very weird input bugs that Street Fighter sometimes has. In fact, I actually can't move off this, so L1 and R1 are doing nothing as well. Oh well, they have claimed their victory and departed. But we have the other bigger problem of the stream being basically on hold because of whatever is up with this thing. So I have up and down, I don't have LR, I don't have options, none of my X buttons. Nope, I got nothing. Hopefully it will kick in when the match ends, or we'll just remake the lounge or something. But given the amount of time that would make, and the fact that it would break everything we had previously, I wonder if I can... We should probably get those two to not play more than one match, but I can't tell them anything this way, so let me go pull in some other forms of communication to tell them, hopefully not to rematch, so that if it is necessary to recreate the lounge, I can do it quickly. This controller is broken, which is why I didn't want you to press it or use it or do anything with it.
It's go time.
Okay, finally, probably, now I have resolved something. Maybe. There we go. So, we're gonna have Suntier attempt to press in, maybe get back into the DeWolf match. The situation was resolved on this side. It was part of the pizza emergency, don't ask. Press has been having some connection issues apparently, but maybe not this week. We'll see what happens.
Let's do this.
As the pandemic drags on, streams become more and more chaotic. Or something. Sundar has a good idea of how to play this matchup, primarily because of the fact that if there's one person I practice against on Chun-Li often, it's Sundar. But this isn't necessarily something that Seth is not equivalent. I call Seth one button Chun because Seth has specific ways of playing and moving that match up a lot, but less tools in exchange for bigger damage. For Akuma, this means you generally have to relax more and usually throw less fireballs. You get to play footsies, you get to play footsies better than against Chun-Li generally, but the fireball game tends to get lessened and you have to be more careful on the anti-airs because Seth's jumps are functionally stronger.
Round one. Fight.
Fireballs tend to lead to situations that tend to advantage Seth over time, which is not something Akuma really wants to happen too much. Max range Tatsu, on the other hand, is really effective against this character. In fact, to the point where I would actually tell people, yes, Tatsu in neutral. Not necessarily because this move is going to go unpunished and be great and always just have everything work out fine. But if you have a really good concept of your spacing and when to do it, Tatsu in neutral is one of the most frustrating things for Seth to face because it means that all of Seth's neutral tools get punished in a really weird way. EX Tatsu is almost as effective when the Seth player is finally at the point of being aggressive. So for the most part, Akuma doesn't have to do anything. He can just watch for the anti-air, and when he doesn't think that's going to happen, Tatsu. If you're at the right spacing, which is the spacing Seth wants to jump from, Seth will move himself to the spacing where the Tatsu is a good idea for you. I would suggest to Seth players that if you really want to deal with this and deal with Akuma in general, take your normal game plan and add like walk up medium kick to it, or walk up crouch medium kick to it, because otherwise you're going to constantly find yourself at a spacing that Akuma wants you at, but Akuma doesn't have to do anything at that spacing, leading to your life being miserable. Walking up will allow you to at least sometimes get close enough so that if you happen to go, okay wait, no, I should stop here and block, Akuma will be too close on the Tatsu and you'll get a proper punish out of it. You always technically get to punish the Tatsu. You either whiff punish it or the spacing is right. But the problem is that understanding which of those two things is going to happen is difficult enough that your life is stressed, and you don't want your stress in neutral. You want your stress to be how to deal with all of the other things Akuma wants to get out of your combos and pressure with, because he has a fair amount of options compared to most characters for dealing with your stuff. But as you can see, Akuma has a lot of control of the neutral without doing very much. He just has to wait for Seth to get to what looks like the optimal Seth position, the one that you would think of in your first order strategy for nearly every other character. This is where I'm supposed to stand because I get to jump, I get to respond with Mad Cradle without being crossed up. I get to use my kick if someone tries to throw a fireball. It seems like such a good place to stand until Akuma starts to hit Tatsu.
Round one. Fight.
He can also hit stand heavy punch, which is obviously equally annoying. The President is a little more used to that though, as that was basically the core of the Akuma versus G matchup before. Another good option for Akuma is to simply take advantage of this scenario so much that he gets to use the reversals to keep control of the situation once he's got it. Once he has control of the situation, it's kind of hard for Seth to do a lot. Ah, could probably have cancelled that. Wait, I've forgotten which part of that it works. Seth players also will have more of a tendency to back roll because that's the optimal situation and position to be in. And that becomes a problem as well because back rolling off of the Tatsu knockdown gives Akuma some stuff. Not good stuff necessarily, but not terrible stuff either. he at least gets to continue his pressure, avoid the having to get back to neutral and guess.
Round 2. Fight.
So this is a very, very relaxed match for Akuma. For the most part. He doesn't really think of Seth as, oh, you're terrifying, you're a big problem. No. Mostly, he just moves around and occasionally does something, and if he doesn't feel like doing anything, he just doesn't. Seth's pressure is also not really all that strong for most things. Seth is a character that gets to keep pressing buttons similar to how Chun-Li does, but that does not mean pressure. Chun-Li nor Seth are pressure characters. You have to know how to eventually move backward at particular timings to bait your opponent into doing something stressful for them, and therefore get something off that. But as you can see, for the most part, the match mostly comes down to Seth's conversions when a hit is landed, and the fact that Akuma's health is relatively lower. As a Seth player, therefore, you have to figure out whether or not your opponent even understands that they can use Tatsu in this way. Whether or not you want to play a game where you're just waiting for the Tatsu. This is not generally the best option. And how much you think you can get damage on them by jumping. Because if you jump, you can get anti-aired, but depending on how you are anti-aired and how much trickery you can use, this might not lead to you taking a lot of damage over time. In fact, it might just let you activate your V-trigger eventually to get a big conversion. Learning the right time to jump at Akuma and take that risk, take whatever damage comes out of it, is important, because if you end up getting up in a bad situation, obviously it's terrible, but Seth as a character structurally doesn't really need meter for a lot. V-trigger is important, but actual meter can just be used to set up a repeated scramble and then land Mad Cradle. Yes, Mad Cradle, and get something from there.
Fight.
Therefore, understanding your own flow, your personal way of playing, and how to mislead your opponent with it a little bit is really important here. For Alex, the core of this matchup is keep blocking. Once you've started blocking, don't try to do anything. This is really important because nearly everything Seth does to Alex puts Seth at a better position than it does put Alex. You can backdash if you are comfortable with this and think it will help you in some way, but normally it just gives Seth more space and doesn't really do anything for you.
Round 2. Fight.
But you can definitely benefit from, Seth has gotten close to me and started hitting buttons. I should just keep blocking until this is over. Because as you can see, Seth has too many options that put advantage for Alex to get much out of it for trying to hit Seth in that space. Alex actually benefits a lot more from flash chop and landing ES power bomb in weird situations than actually fighting back. This is further compounded by the same problem Abigail has. Armor breaks. So, I would suggest to Alex players, keep your meter for EX power bomb and EX air knee smash, because you can use the ES air knee smash when Seth wants to get through a particular type of pressure. To stick to you, you can air knee smash out of that, because Seth is a character that doesn't really do full pressure. Target combo characters are relatively easy to do this with, because you will end up blocking the whole thing, and they're most likely not going for a low right after. Seth is a character that should, but often doesn't. Mainly because the opponent is likely to just block it, and the low doesn't end up with much advantage, so yeah. You can of course use the V reversal, and depending on your playstyle this may be a big deal to you, but because Alice's V reversal tends to push Seth back out, and Alice doesn't have much advantage there either, you're usually better off expecting Seth to eventually retreat from you, or trying to get out of situations with EX Air Knee Smash or EX Powerbomb. There are a lot of moves that Seth does where you would figure that Alex's grabs won't reach, and they don't, but the EX will barely make it, especially if you know how to do the slight micro walk part of it. You can get a big benefit out of that. I'm not sure if this is laggy or not. We did mention that the president was considering that there were some issues with connectivity, but we're definitely seeing the same shifts happening. Duo tends to adapt fairly quickly to things, but doesn't tend to laser focus the way some other players do or can, and that means that occasionally when the laser focus is required, it takes a little longer. Fortunately, Alex does a lot of damage, and good conversions will get you fairly far. This is basically going to come down to basically then, how easy is it to deal with Sethbot? I think I've made sure that the Wolf has a Sethbot, but a lot of it is understanding spacings and when to EX Powerbomb out of Seth pressure or after Seth moves. Alex can also do a bunch of parry stuff, but it's not always the best option because to parry in those situations opens you up to a lot of back jump Seth tricks. So it looks like if it is laggy, that's probably going to make this even harder. And even if it isn't, the Wolf is going to have to work on this one for a bit.
Seth wins. It's go time.
If it was laggy, it's possible the president will leave today. We didn't hear again through the grapevine that this might not be a thing, but it wasn't the terrible type of lag. The updates to Street Fighter's netcode functionality means that, for the most part, if you are comfortable and trained in moves in the first place, if you aren't mashy or, like, underconfident in your moves, you can probably get them off in the current form of the game's netcode. Because it wasn't that the netcode was ever terrible in itself, it's that this fluttery desync thing that it did was obviously getting on everyone's nerves because it was terrible. Now you don't get it as often, and it tends to skip the frames correctly. So if your timing was right in your mind, and you weren't relying too much on what was on the screen, you're probably fine.
Round one. Fight.
This matchup is relatively advantaged to Seth in a specific way if Abigail wants to do too many things. You can break neutral, you can't really hit crouch heavy punch because you get whiff punished by things. And a lot of the matchup is about understanding how to anti-air Seth correctly at specific times and a bunch of other things. But Abigail can absolutely handle this matchup overall if it's played really patiently and with one specific understanding of spacing. Seth's flow relative to Abigail means that there's not a lot of spaces where Seth gets to just do anything. Seth has to often pay some attention to whether or not Abigail actually is playing offense at the moment or not. And because maintaining the correct spacing without getting stand heavy punched involves walking backward, Seth will often get walked down. The stand heavy punch's pushback, like many characters in this game, also pushes Seth to positions where the situation is not optimal anymore. But because it's required to withhold both the run and the crouch heavy punch a lot of the time,
Seth
this is another situation where if you play your standard matchup, if you play the way you play normally, the situation tends to get bad because it's not a matter of... it's what Seth is looking for. And you have to learn this about characters in the game. When their game plan is about taking advantage of yours, your basic standard one, that's what they're going to constantly be looking for. You will probably never get a relatively serious player out of that mindset. They will be looking for it no matter what you're doing. So you have to break their expectations. Seth simply stands too far away for the crouch heavy punch into run to work well. Seth also requires a specific type of anti-air that Abigail players should normally have, but Amara doesn't have a lot of practice on because it just doesn't come up. Most people she fights stay away and don't actually try to fight close at all. So the understanding of when exactly the forward heavy punch has to be used tends to be something she has to pick up as a match goes on.
Round 2.
She unfortunately gets some experience with this matchup in some friendly lounge matches a while back against an opponent who was much more likely to try to play aggressively though. And I mean, by aggressively I mean like the full-on I'm trying to beat you in neutral sort of aggressive. So the other fundamental parts of the matchup, from what I observed, she basically understands how to deal with, and it's just going to come down to a lot of that aspect of it. From the President's side, the option that would probably be most suitable is to keep trying to find the correct timing for Seth's jumping, let's call it axe kick. I don't know what anyone else wants to call that. This is the thing that can be used to reposition properly and avoid a specific form of neutral which Abigail wants to play. As you can just see there, it can't really be parried if it's done as a feint, but it still hits and beats a lot of Abigail's buttons. It requires the forward heavy punch a lot of the time. And this sort of thing means that it's possible for Seth to get off the other moves and force Abigail to use up meter, as you've just seen. Seth does take damage from doing that, but it's way less damage than letting Abigail do metered stuff later. And as you can see, there's nothing, Abigail gets nothing off that. That is more so meant to get you out of pressure. Being forced to use it for just the flip kick, the axe kick, is basically in Seth's favor, because Abigail has to soak up a lot of damage in this matchup to do well. Changing the options of how much damage Abigail can therefore reciprocate with is a big boon for Seth. Keep Abigail's meter low so that no big conversions allow Abigail to quote-unquote steal the round from you. That said, if the forward heavy punch starts to become a thing that works, the player must be fairly primed for this, and I mean really primed for this, meaning that your other jumps, or even sometimes just dashes, are likely to be more effective. If you realize you need to get in on Abigail but can't find a way, using that as a good distraction that generally doesn't have a strong counter. And the counter it does have is Abigail hitting the button you want Abigail to hit so that you can grab him. This is a good way to put stress on your opponent if you find that you needed to do that some other way. It also, of course, allows you to preserve your own meter so that Mad Cradle is more effective. And helps you deal with Abigail's crouching heavy kick, which is one of the better options in this matchup. Seth has some good punishes for it, but those ones actually do somewhat depend on meter. Held it longer this time.
Round 2. Fight.
Of course, this match becomes harder and harder as Abigail players train the required physical reactions more and more. But this doesn't really mean that Seth's game plan needs to change as a whole. It just involves slightly more neutral buttons. Abigail is one of the few characters where Seth just hitting stand, medium kick, and neutral is helpful. But more so as a whiff punish for other things. Overall.
Let's do this.
But we're back to Suntier's relaxed day. I guess not at the beach. Kansuki Beach would be a better solution for this.
Round 1. Fight.
Another thing that Akuma getting to fight this match so relaxedly does is it pushes the Seth player to have to wonder when Akuma makes an action, was it actually intended to hit or not? And this is kind of important because Akuma taking actions that aren't intended to actually do anything is a big deal. It means Akuma gets to walk in this matchup a lot more than in others, despite the fact that Seth should technically be so good at causing Akuma to not do that. This is because you cannot tell if at any given point in that walk Akuma is just going to randomly Tatsu. And there is a specific range on the screen where Akuma, whenever he walks through that range, Seth has the question, should I hit a button to prevent him from getting any closer to me, or do I have to worry about getting Tatsu'd? The easy answer to this is mostly to jump, but again, if Akuma did nothing, he was probably walking forward and is almost completely prepared to uppercut you. Even if you were probably going to cross him up, he's still prepared to uppercut you. And since Akuma's anti-air does go up, does have invincibility against air moves, and does not care about Seth's dive kick functionally, it's really not a thing where it matters that much. Seth can
Seth
take
wins.
this fairly easily. Not that that's what happened in that round, but in general, if you take what I've just said as purely I should keep walking forward and doing Tatsu, which also didn't happen in that round, eventually the Seth player will figure out what to do, even if you don't always do the Tatsu. Specifically because
Round 1.
if you don't play it in the relaxed way, Seth is never stressed. Seth is just thinking about which of the two things that could happen because you are walking forward are going to happen. In other words, the Seth player gets to think, I can win this by defending. I don't have to... If I get lucky, if I get the right combos off, if I have my meter ready, Akuma will eventually make enough mistakes that I have a chance of winning this without taking any offensive action at all. This is not where you want to get the player's mindset as Akuma. As Akuma, your wish is to have Seth wonder whether or not they can win, because you might just take the life lead and sit on it, because that could happen here now. Even with that conversion, the question still stands. Can you actually beat me from here? Like, do you have a way to hit me enough to do so without endangering yourself terribly? Because Seth is not actually that good at pressure, as I mentioned. He can mislead most characters, but Akuma is a character that you'll eventually get traded on, or parried, or uppercut, or something. Getting a life lead, therefore, is not as important to Akuma as some characters would have it be for them, but if he has it, Seth's stress increases dramatically because the Seth player is now forced to do a lot of stressful work while still also dealing with all the other Akuma things that we've mentioned so far. And there's the Tatsu.
Akuma wins.
The problem with Seth is that, as powerful as the character can be, Seth is relatively linear. There aren't a ton of ways to take Seth's tools and create completely new and novel situations from them.
Fight.
That seems to be the character's main limitation. As far as we can tell, by watching we've watched Omni Rabbit do it with certain type, with a little advice on the same concept. We've watched relatively higher level Seth matches online. I've collected a lot of Seth data for various reasons, and so far, not even the best players have demonstrated, in my opinion, that you can mess people up with this character. You can make them do the wrong thing because they think they have a read on you, but that's deception. It's not really putting so much stress on the opponent that they have to deal with you. Seth is not a super stressful character to deal with. Even with the other V, trigger, and V skill options, neither of these seems to add enough to the character to create this. It's, I can keep pressing buttons as long as I want, and you have to care. Mini shimmy. I was expecting to cross up, so technically I would have been shimmied as well. The tick throw is helpful, but at higher levels it doesn't seem to do too much because the players just, like, Seth doesn't have an option other than the tick throw. He has a little damage off something, I think. And that combo doesn't really do enough damage per se, so... Akuma also has too many other ways to bypass neutral, defeat Mad Cradle, and get in towards Seth's feet. So again, Akuma plays very relaxed, and Seth ends up relatively stressed. Not the best situation to be in. I would honestly suggest that Seth players because you know you're gonna beat Akuma players in situations, and even if they are not super relaxed and tend to play very aggressively, they'll probably know enough about this character to think to themselves, I should probably not push too hard on myself. I don't need to do that much. My suggestion therefore is make sure that all of your reactions and so on are ready, are down. Make sure that you train against Akuma bot at least a bit if you have our Akuma bot, because it is not easy to play this matchup without being the one ending up super tired by the end of it. Imagine doing this 3 out of 5. No.
Seth wins.
But the present pulls through on that one.
It's go time.
And has dropped 2 back this time, which means that this is going to happen on this side too, and we'll see if we get the wolves facing off today. Looks like we will. Character select off is the lounge setting today. If you're looking for it, we have 1 slot open. We're looking therefore at Alex versus Nakali. And therefore, I'm taking a break from talking because we have discussed this matchup at length before.
Okay, let's rumble. Loud.
Round 1. Fight.
I'm all warmed up. I'm all warmed up. I'm all warmed up. I'm all warmed up. Looks like you could use more training.
Round 2. Fight.
I'm all warmed up.
Alex wins. Round 1. Fight.
I'm all warmed up. could use more training.
Final round. Fight! Alex wins. Let's do this. Round one. Fight!
Looks like I've got more horsepower.
Round two. Fight!
All warmed up. All warmed up.
Abigail wins. Round one. Fight!
Looks like I won. Alright.
Round 2. Fight!
All warmed up. Looks like I've got more horsepower.
Final round. Fight! Abigail wins. Let's do this.
We are back to matchups we haven't seen in a while, and that I have something to say about. This matchup is usually fairly stressful for both players. Akuma and Abigail both manage to transform the matchup quite a bit once their V-trigger is activated, but getting to the situation for it involves a lot of close range combat and fast decisions, which can stress either side. One of the main things that's important from the Abigail side is the understanding when to leave the mid-range open. Akuma is not so great at approaching Abigail. Akuma often benefits from, when the two are separated far, Abigail coming in and Akuma getting big conversions. So it's honestly a lot easier, depending on the situation, for Abigail to not do anything like that. To just, okay, no, I'm gonna stay over here for a little bit. Maybe go into stance, maybe run at you if you throw a fireball, maybe see what happens if you demon flip, because Abigail can deal with a lot of those options, whereas Akuma has to think a lot. When Akuma makes the right decision, it generally pays off a lot, like big damage. But Abigail doesn't really fear big damage, at least not easily. So, am I going in when we have managed to get thrown apart by either a move landing or just the natural interaction of the two characters is important, because back rolling gets Akuma out of a lot of problems Abigail wants to cause. Abigail can dash, but can't dash too much or will end up being completely open. But if a back roll happens, then Abigail is often not close enough. So functionally, depending on the situation, back rolling just gets Akuma his own mix-up side. This is really important because the number of interactions these two characters have in neutral is under Akuma's control more so than anything else. Big damage that Abigail gets from defending correctly is something Akuma can just avoid. He doesn't really have to fight this matchup by trying to get in all that hard, or trying to pressure and risking the retaliation that may come from that pressure. And this is what ends up pushing Abigail to have to use that option of holding the Nitro Charge and then making the decision a little bit later. This is additional adaptive stress easily placed on Akuma, more so than generally just approaching. Characters who don't do maximum damage at close range, or who have to use a lot of resources to do it, or even who have difficult conversions, to them, Abigail approaching can be stressful because it's basically, you're going to probably, it's possible for you to die in 2 interactions, and you messing up the execution on the second means the round is over. Akuma doesn't care a lot about this. He doesn't tend to have a problem massively with the execution aspects, and he does a lot of damage he can output himself if the situation calls for it. Ah, the torpedo. I'm sure everyone else does that too, but given who Mara normally fights, the first person I've ever seen do that to her is Torpedo. On the other hand, Sunterra's watched that match, so yeah.
Round 2. Fight.
And this is sort of what I refer to. Akuma doesn't really have to play this match by trying to get in playing close range in the first place. He can slowly wear Abigail down, something that most characters cannot do without risking much. Akuma does get to do it. Akuma, Ryu, not really Sakura. She tends to have a little bit more trouble with it. But most characters don't have as many vectors or as strong zoning of the specific type required to do this as Akuma and Ryu.
Final round.
Because everyone else has to worry about, oh, are you going to get run through my relatively slow grounded move with armor? Whereas Akuma gets that. As well as Air Fireball. And both Akuma and Ryu have that specific EX Tatsu that doesn't seem like it would do a lot, but does change the spacing and set up a lot of situations that are definitely in their favor.
Abigail wins.
Unfortunately for both of these players, actually doing certain things in this matchup ends up being hard because they're constantly stressing each other. The characters are stressful to play against each other, and the players have styles that further stress each other. So this is a match where if you were going to talk about seeing execution drops, I would expect to see execution drops in this match, more so than any other matchup that you've seen
Round
today.
1. Fight.
That said, the Abigail player doesn't really need to fight that sort of close range either. it absolutely still works to just chill out. But you can't do it too constantly, because then Akuma will become really comfortable and you'll start getting hit by things that normally would never manage to get you. So Abigail does have to spend some of that massive HP pool on very specific risks, either instinctive or calculated. But the main point is to understand that there is a rhythm here that matters a lot, and stressing your opponent is definitely part of it. Because you're never going to be in a situation where Akuma doesn't have an option, meaning you either have to know them all or be very, very daring and trust in your own. Since almost everything either player does can be countered, it often has more than one counter. There's the very fast counter you could get if you were super aware, and then a counter that works if you pick right, but could happen slower. All that is even more stress. For example, that jump was a risk. You know Abigail can stop it, but is Abigail going to be thinking about that? You've powered up Akuma. It could be air fireball. There could have been a grounded fireball that happened. You could even Tatsu over in certain situations. Dive kick. It's those sorts of things that change the flow, that change the stress levels of certain things, so that you have to decide, is it worth my time to build up a reaction? Because a lot of the time, you're going to be specifically misled by your opponent who is trying to frustrate you, or your opponent who has seen through your defensive options if you use the same one repeatedly.
Let's do this.
This is another match that tends to cause some strain on both sides. Both players play their character very naturally, so there's usually not a lot to say. Any adaptation is volatile. What does tend to be the deciding factor here is how calm Amara is about advancing. Because it's relatively easy to get stuck in a loop, since, as we mentioned a long time ago, it's quite optimal for Necalli to basically zone Abigail. Lots and lots of perfectly spaced seismos, lots and lots of I am now jumping into a dive kick that I know you're not going to anti-air because reasons. And lots of, okay, well, you were near me, but now I've punched you off me, and now you have to deal with everything else I can do again. Abigail can, of course, wait on meter. He can build up a ton of stuff. He has enough health to tank through a lot of this, but you have to be a certain level of non-stressed to actually get away with using these options in that way. Since Necalli gets to react to basically anything Abigail wants to do at the range that Abigail ends up at.
Round 2. Fight.
You can convert some of this if you get a bit of a life lead by using either Giant Flip if you think your opponent is going to move, or Avalanche. But Avalanche is more so when you know that Necalli does not have enough meter yet to hurt you terribly for doing it. And therefore is an option that gets disabled technically by Necalli sitting on meter. And those are some of the most stressful options to have to deal with, when your opponent doesn't have to do anything to take away your tool other than hold enough meter to make sure that doing it is a bad idea. This is particularly true when you don't necessarily have the health to outlast them. Sometimes you go, well, I have the health, I'll just tank through your meter usage and then you won't have it anymore. But this doesn't necessarily work in matches like this, where the character, your opponent, has so much health of their own and much explosive damage, even without the meter, that you can't do that. Necalli is not a super high health character, but he's definitely got enough health to start causing trouble. Fortunately for Mara, these two know each other's instincts fairly well as well. You see this sometimes in much higher level matches, when two players that often train together or just for some reason are very familiar with the other's playstyle get on stream and the match morphs into something that does not look at all like what the matchup is supposed to be by most people's standards. Because they are like, we normally talk about on our notes and our spreadsheets or whatever else, hey, we've got like 5 levels, layers in to understand this matchup. They're at like 7, and it's completely unrecognizable because the first 5 things are not even happening, or when they do, they happen so rarely as almost as shenanigans, and you never know what's going on anymore. It can actually make the match look a little wonky because you end up thinking, why do you keep on getting hit by that? That's like the most basic thing in this matchup, you're not supposed to get hit by that. But I assure you that they're just not thinking about the same things as you anymore at all. This is something you see particularly when other UK players end up in tournaments against Problem X. It shows up a lot there. That dive kick was probably expected, because if you parry as if you were expecting a jump, I think it would miss. So she had to be expecting the dive kick, which is basically the same sort of thing I'm talking about. So why would you parry there? That is supposed to never work, except that she was expecting to need to parry because of the rest of it. I forgot you can knock him out of that even before that happens. So close to stunning, yet no stun. Ooh, that reached barely. At the very least, it usually becomes exciting.
Abigail wins.
Here we have a Cody. I think I kind of recognize his name. No, I don't.
Let's do this.
This is one of Amara's worst matchups, and we don't get to see it often enough, obviously, other than her playing it, to know whether or not that is relative to the game, or relative to the character, her understanding of the character, etc. But it's a stressful matchup to say the least. And similar to the Seth one in that there's a lot of I shouldn't do too much and I need my forward heavy punch. Cody is not a character where you can parry out of a lot of his stuff, but mostly you have to decide this based on his meter levels. And just when you think you've got everything else worked out, yet Zonk Knuckle is still a thing. So I expect this to be stressful, but it depends on how much this opponent jumps versus their other styles of approaching. If they jump a lot, she may be able to just adapt with the forward heavy punch eventually. If they play very grounded, this is going to be similar to Seth with a lot of issues and stresses, and aiming to try to hit with crouch medium kick. But it looks like it's that laggy, I don't know. That's odd, it looked like it was such a good connection too. But this one seems outright frozen. So, who knows? But piling lag on top of a bad matchup is even worse. Spectating has been halted. Did we even get the match? No, and they didn't even get to stick around. But it was probably better this way, because then she'll probably take another break. Although I expect that the President and Wolf are not going to be ready for this at this point. We'll see what happens. We are coming close to the end of our normal stream time. We did start the stream late. That doesn't necessarily mean anything. There is one slot open, and you can assume that people are not necessarily going to be taking their turn when it comes up, so if you join in, you might get boosted to the top. Pay attention to this if you do happen to join in that last slot. Again, this is 3 rounds, first 2. Character select is off. And we have managed to shuffle around to Nakali versus Akuma. Okay then. As I was saying, character select is off if you do want to join it. We are down to the usual suspects at the moment, until someone else does. And we've had a bit to say about nearly every matchup for the night, which means that, as usual, we're ending the talking part of the stream probably now. Or rather, the stream itself. Tomorrow is likely to have another Unist, or rather unclear, launch. Our information from the Guilty Gear beta was heavily inconclusive, and honestly, based on the first report, we honestly did not give due diligence to that. It was, oh, we got into the beta. I think our second access point to the beta wasn't even used, because when it was possible, our report from OmniRabbit was that the beta was not working that well. By the time it was fixed, we had somewhat lost the hype and weren't really available in that specific timing. So we only ended up having OmniRabbit do Kai things for a while. I'm yet to get a full report, because a lot of what we expected to change was based on the same issues with throws and so on, and Gatlings were more so what mattered. It's hard to tell, because people testing out a couple of things in a beta is not an easy way to determine whether or not the entire offense-defense concept of the game has changed. But I'm sure you can check on Twitter for all of the various opinions people had of the game, of the beta. If you're not a Twitter person, I think I saw an article. But you can probably expect more of a report the next time they throw one up. I don't know if you have to reapply or if you were just get into the closed beta the second time, because it's easier to just put you in if you were in the last one, I think. Depends on their architecture. I would definitely expect that whoever got in last time just gets in automatically next time, so we will at least get the OmniRabbit data the next time around. But at the moment, we don't seem to be heading in the direction of Guilty Gear Strive yet. We'll let you know about that. Which means that the main games played by the team are still in the same space. We may be still getting some Dragon Ball action on maybe Saturdays or something, but as we still mostly play that at beginner level, and not a lot of people really like, oh, the Cody's back. Maybe they had a like terrible net glitch or something. We definitely weren't expecting a lot of joy across the world at the current Guilty Gear. The more important question to us is actually what will happen to the support and tournaments for Rev 2. Some people were complaining that, not many, but I definitely saw a couple of people complaining that Rev 2 was getting slightly stale. Mainly because the top players are way above everyone else. And this is often a reason to change up the way a game plays. The question is whether or not you could. If a game was really already extremely good, then you're already sort of locked in. The top players will continue to be top, probably. And new players will have to climb the ranks through all of that. And there's not going to be much chance of them catching up in the way you'd expect. But at the same time, if the game was already nearly perfectly designed, I'm not saying that Guilty Gear is,
Akuma wins.
particularly not Rev 2's specific requirements for newer players. You can somewhat see why they made some of the changes they did, but it's still up in the air which of the things from Rev 2 will be tossed away and which will be in some way reapplied to Strive. So,
Fight.
we'll be watching out for this. We do have that continued opinion that there are certain fundamental changes that they've made to the game that will shift how people think about it, but will it shift whether or not the game is fun to play for a Guilty Gear game? That is not something we feel qualified to make a call on. But as I said, I haven't gotten on Rabbit's full report yet. And I haven't watched most of the streams of people testing it out or playing in the beta to see what the general opinion of the flow was. Especially since I would have to watch the streams from later into it when people have a kind of a handle on what they want to do or think is important. We'll see. But I will be definitely looking into that for you. And maybe the next beta will happen at a time where we're more likely to be able to stream it. Maybe. So that brings us to, once again, Street Fighter V. Unclear on Tuesdays. Sometimes more Street Fighter V, very seldom more Street Fighter V on Wednesdays. Depending on where people feel they are in terms of their casuals, if they understand what they need to work on or not. Mostly sandbag casuals happens when someone feels, I don't actually know what to work on now. Let me go fight in some casuals or maybe even ranked a little bit, usually as casuals though, to figure out what I need to do, how I can improve my damage, what I need to practice. That isn't mental. I mean, mental stuff does get done, but mental stuff often happens in this match. And on Thursdays, we had a good Dead or Alive session last Thursday. We expect another. Fridays are, as usual, reserved for any bot content. Life has been a little weird with that, but our DOA bots are likely to be picking up precisely because we've heard that there will be multiple free character weekends coming up. How exactly they plan to do this, I don't know. I really hope that they make the characters available from like the Friday to the Friday so we can get this guidance out, but that doesn't really help in the strictest sense. It would be more helpful if they switched on Monday. You know, give you a little time to practice during the week. Test yourself on the Saturday against other people. Judge if you want to finally buy the character or not at the end of the Sunday and go into the next week. Let's cross our fingers for that, because that is also the optimal for us in terms of bot testing and development. We could have a bot possibly ready by Friday and enough testing time on Saturday and Sunday to do something with it. With all of that said though, we're going into our last on-stream match of the night. The lounge normally stays open for another half an hour at minimum. It may stay open for a full hour this time. Don't expect to find us after that. You are looking for Rune Siren with 3 rounds, first to 2, character select off. And this lounge is basically Atlantic Rim if you want to have a good connection to everyone. Some people are much further away but have really good internet. So you probably shouldn't be laggy unless you are middling internet, Midwest, or getting South America possibly too far into the hinterlands of Europe.
Round one. Fight.
So we get our usual stressful face-off. Super interesting, but probably super tiring. As we mentioned, with almost all of our Street Fighter bots done without too much direct in, we don't even know what's going to happen to general FGC content. I don't think we're going to have much like falling apart. In fact, I think this might also be better for streamers and online tournaments. People don't give up just because they can't go to venues. But it does affect locals, it does affect tournaments, it does affect people's mindsets toward social ability and getting better in particular ways. You know us, our content is designed for exactly this situation. You are forced to stay at home, play more or less by yourself, you might not even have good internet. We have some bots for you that would like to probably teach you something. But one way or the other, we're expecting to see some changes in the way people approach things, even if it's just, oh, we don't get to have most of our big content this year. For Street Fighter V, that's kind of a big deal though, because people were kind of looking to the Intel World Open and similar things to cause a shift in the way that people perceive the game, get Championship Edition a boost a bit.
Final round.
As far as I know, most people are okay with this. Of course, it's hard to say because the people who were complaining about the game before are probably just tired of doing so finally. And you haven't seen a lot of, okay, the game is better now, the game is great now. There were some, but generally the opinions that people have had have stuck. And I can say probably that if you didn't like Street Fighter V before, you're not going to start liking it now. They didn't change anything that will make you like it. Players got better, and therefore a lot of the things you possibly thought were a problem before, you could put in hard work to get around it, but you'd still be probably facing people who are still going to do full strategy stuff. You're still going to face people like Banaharo RD, I believe it was, at the beginning of the launch, and you have to decide whether or not that's worth it to you. If you don't like the game, I've recently had an experience that indicated to me that if you don't like the game, you could be 8,888 matches in and still consider the game to be terrible. Shoutouts to that person, they know who they are. So yeah, if you didn't like Street Fighter before, I'm not really suggesting you play it now. Wait for something you like better. Or take a good hard look at yourself in case you're one of those people who just doesn't like fighting games in general but thinks you do. There are people like that. It really helps you if you own up to it. Because then you can go play Grand Blue and Dragon Ball, which are games technically designed for that sort of person that still are functionally... Other people like them enough to play against you, even though the thing that you get out of it is not what they're aiming for. Games that have recently changed to not be so much so. Samurai Showdown is getting more to this side. In some people's concept better, in others not. Soul Calibur got a little bit of shifts that made some people happier. But as it stands now, Dragon Ball is even more Marvel. And by that I mostly mean that it's interactive, but there are definitely some periods where you don't get to do anything for a while. You make maybe 4 decisions a round against a really good opponent. Or if there's a big skill gap, you get to make like 4 decisions, if that many. And by round I mean basically the entire match. there are definitely people who can... I think the Frieza Touch of Death is still in. And Frieza's Touch of Death is nearly meterless, so good luck with that. And Grand Blue Witch! I'm still trying to figure out what they were trying to do with that game. Everyone I've seen that likes it plays very, very specific characters. I mean, there are people who like the concept of it who are waiting for some changes, but in terms of, man, I really like this game and I want to play it all the time, that's mostly been very specific character choices.
Akuma wins.
But I do not mean that as a way to knock on anyone. I'm literally specifically telling you, if you don't enjoy fighting games from the perspective of all the mind games and the crazy stuff that can happen and the people who choose to play in ways that don't make sense to you are suboptimal, you have options. What you do not have the option of is watching more of this stream. You can find more of our content at 2-mk.org and our tweets to tell you when we are streaming and what about at 2_mk_FGC. This has been Rillian for Team 2MK. Good luck with your training and good night, everyone.